How do you imagine the life of the wife of the Ottoman Sultan? Chic outfits and jewelry, lots of slaves ready to fulfill your every wish? A beautiful sultan who loves and bestows you with caresses and jewels. But what does it really feel like to be the sultan's wife? Living in a harem where everyone wants to kill you to take your place? Does the sultan even consider you a being created only to give birth to his children? Is it true that the concubines of the Padishah had no right to any pleasures, including delicious food? Why did the sultan's wives leave his bed after they gave birth to his son? And what would be their fate if the sultan fell in love with another concubine? Why could the sultan's woman be kicked out of the palace and her children be executed? And how did it happen that one of the most beautiful women of Suleiman the Magnificent's harem, Mahidevran, ended her days in poverty and grief? When Mahidevran first came to Shahzad Suleiman's harem, it was the most overcast day of her life. She hoped that the fate in the palace of her father, who was the brother of the Crimean Khan, would be as bright as those flowers that bloomed in the palace garden. Instead, she stood in front of Kalfa with her head down and her dress rumpled after a long sea voyage to the Ottoman Empire. Take a deep breath, Gulbahar. No one told you that at the age of 14 it would be easy to get into Shahzad's harem. Her father and Aish Hafsa had been planning this move for a long time as Suleiman's bride. The idea of an early marriage in the distant Ottoman Empire did not please the crown princess of the Crimean Khanate in any way. She had heard so many bad stories about the harem, but she couldn't resist her father's will and didn't know how to do it. After all, she was raised as a pious girl, without a drop of vice. Beauty. To whom, my beauty, were you given? Is this what I've been dreaming about since early childhood? She pushed her long black hair off her shoulders with thin hands stained with coastal sand and clay. The gray wide dress looked out of place on her perfect slender figure. It literally hung down to the floor and was too ugly for Gulbahar's taste. Noticing the concern of Suleiman's fiancé, Kalfa told her to go to the hammam. Straightening up, the girl smoothed the folds of the dress on her chest and proudly entered the bath. What is it? Why did so many girls come with me? By the way, what kind of wife will I be? No, I will become the only woman for the future sultan. A hammam is a place that was visited once a week. The whole day was devoted to this water procedure. The girls went to the bathhouse in the morning and returned in the evening. In addition to washing, all kinds of cosmetic procedures were carried out there. Facial and body massage, applying useful masks to hair, epilation, manicure, skin whitening and other simple activities. Therefore, of course, if the concubine was lucky enough to get into the sultan's habit, then she did not go to the bath according to the schedule. In addition to all kinds of procedures, the hammam was a place of gossip and various cheerful communication. The hammam in the harem was not alone, as you understand. Vili Day, for example, had a separate bath, and, of course, she did not go to the public, let's call it that. The sultan also had his own hammam. Water was not brought to the hammam of the harem, it flowed from the tap, which, of course, is the merit of Mimar Sinan. We are talking about the Topkapi Palace. Despite the availability of water, it was necessary to use it sparingly, since it was not easy to extract water and maintain the sewer system. In the hammam, water was poured into separate containers. The girls used special dishes similar to a round salad bowl. Of course, there was both cold and hot water in the bath, heated separately. Hammam soap was brewed in the Ottoman Empire itself. Fruity and flavored, which can be considered the first example of modern perfume soap, was considered a favorite subject of the entire harem. Traditionally, soap with olive oil was used, but the expensive and rare musky soap was presented by the nobility to the sultan himself. In a hammam, a slave must devote so much time to applying various fragrances so that the fragrance remains on her body and hair all week. After that, incense was burned in the hammam. It was watered with rosewater and essential oils were used. Gulbahar is very tired. Is it a joke to sail all day from Crimea to Istanbul? After the hammam, the girls were given the clothes of the concubines of the harem. But it was no better than the one in which Gulbahar arrived. Gray and very simple, the girls went to the harem room, where Kalfa pointed each to her sleeping place. What kind of monstrous living conditions! They sleep and eat in the same place. But soon I will become the mistress and I will live separately from this herd. The Topkapi Palace complex is simply huge. In fact, it is the area of one small village, where there is everything from schools and hospitals to private houses and administrative buildings. However, the harem is a separate block of the residential complex of the palace, consisting of many apartments, figuratively speaking. In different centuries, concubines lived in the harem. Their number depended on the ambitions of the ruling sultan and ranged from 100 to 1,000 or more. But, not all of them led a full life and rejoiced. Only a small part lived in separate rooms, while the rest slept, ate and spent their days all in one room, large as a huge hall. Why did all the slaves of the palace live in the same room? Was it really impossible to settle them in twos, threes? Why such a dormitory as in a barrack? The fact is that there was no question of any central heating system. Yes, there was water. But the huge rooms and halls of the palace were heated by small fireplaces. Therefore, keeping all the girls of the harem in one place was beneficial, both in terms of heating and total control over what they do. After all, we all know how strict the rules were. Eunuchs monitored their observance. And imagine a crowd of girls from 14 to 25 years old, approximately, who in fact are still children. It was strictly forbidden to violate the rules of the harem, and a eunuch, if he did not keep track of any prankster, could lose his head. Meanwhile, Gulbahar noticed several beautifully dressed girls on the balcony of the harem rooms. They looked down on the concubines and giggled loudly, calling them clumsy and ugly sheep. I wonder what kind of girls they are. Probably members of the Sultan's dynasty. I would also like to wear such a beautiful dress and jewelry here in the harem. I didn't deny myself anything like that at home. Am I really going to drag out a miserable existence? Why was I treated like this at all? Where is Aish Hafsa? There is no question of any cleavage, open shoulders and arms. The girls were wearing trousers, and on their shoulders they had something like a knee-length tunic. The slaves in the harem received wages, and the money was spent on cosmetics, jewelry and fabrics. Basically, they used simple clothes made of inexpensive raw materials for everyday wear, and on holidays the concubines wore the most exquisite outfits and jewelry. Important, for the clothes of not only concubines, but also all the inhabitants of the palace, was the color of the fabric and patterns. Basically, all shades of red and green were used. The drawings can also be hand-embroidered. Flower patterns were most appreciated: tulips, carnations, plum twigs, roses. The head should always be covered. She wore bandanas, as we would say now, turbans and any other round headdresses with carved cone-shaped shapes on their heads, with very fine drapery trim. And the young concubines braided thin braids with pearls and blue beads, and tied them with ribbons. As jewelry, slaves wore gold necklaces, bracelets, rings made of many precious stones and long earrings. Waking up in the morning, Gulbahar realized that her life here is very different from the one she imagined sitting in the palace garden by the rose bush. She did not understand why she had not yet been taken to Valida Sultan. Having had breakfast here, on the floor, with other concubines, she firmly decided to interrogate Kalfa and demand to take her to Shahzad Suleiman's mother. But Kalfa from the harem beat her to it. Ordering her to follow, they walked through the long and cold corridors of the palace in Manisa. She finally met her fiancé's mom. Of course, she is not yet a Valide Sultan, but no less a domineering woman. Soon her son will ascend to the throne. Then Gulbahar will become his mother-in-law's right hand and show all these girls from the harem how to laugh at her. Would she like Suleiman? The girl was not sure of anything, because she had never been with any man before. Yes, she is beautiful and smart, and surely more than one important man would like to marry her. But, nevertheless, how not to lose face? How to use your appearance to the fullest? Hafsa greeted Gulbahar with a big smile on her face. She didn't expect to be so beautiful. Aish saw her when she was a child. And although little Gulbahar was already distinguished by pleasant facial features, Shahzad's mother could not imagine that such a beautiful rose would grow out of a girl. My son will like it. May Allah grant that she will give birth to many children for him and, most importantly, Shahzada. Aish Hafsa dreamed of grandchildren. After a friendly conversation, the mother-in-law ordered Gulbahar to be sent to a dressmaker to sew her the most beautiful dress. And then she ordered to prepare the girl for the night with Shahzad. I am finally going to meet my fiancé. I hope I like it. The girls in the harem said that Suleiman was far from handsome. But let him be a freak, but I will become his lawful wife and take a high position in the harem. And love is a profitable thing, I don't have to choose anymore. Despite the fact that the dressmaker was well versed in sewing, Gulbahar clearly did not like her taste. She offered 2 modest fabrics, and the bride of Shahzad argued with her for a long time. Mashallah, the women agreed. Gulbahar, on the other hand, still had to sleep a few nights in the harem until her outfit was ready, and she went to have it to Shahzada Suleiman. Oh, this Havit, how important was he to the Sultan and his concubines? Is it true that there was such a term as Havit? What does all this mean in the Ottoman Empire? You will be surprised to know that this is a Havit. And this is also a Havit. What about the Sultan's night with a woman? Have we been lied to again? No. Let me tell you the details of the Havit. Where this term came from, what it meant and how the very intimate relationship of the concubine with the master was actually arranged. The term Havit came to the Ottoman Empire from Sufism. Its true meaning is to be alone, to pray. In order for you to better understand what Havit is initially, I suggest you recall a scene from the TV series Magnificent Century, when after the execution of Mustafa, Sultan Suleiman retired to the dungeon for a few days, settled in a room meter by meter and prayed, refusing ordinary food too. This is the true face of Havit. During the time of the Ottoman sultans, this term was combined with sexuality, or, as I would say, with the intimate relationship of the Padishah. Since then, staying alone at night with a concubine in the sultan's chambers is also called Havit. In Islam, a man and a woman who are not married are forbidden to be alone in a closed place. Otherwise, it's a Havit. In order for this to be possible, they must be legally married. This allows you to stay alone in the room if there are no other obstacles to sexual relations. We know that the relationship between the Sultan and his slave was settled by Islam, since the slave is the property of the Padishah. What were the rules of Havit with the Sultan? Unlike the information that has been repeatedly heard that the Sultan's concubine was allegedly chosen by the Valide Sultan or the chief eunuch, in fact, the rules for getting a slave into the Sultan's chambers differed at different times. The harem in the Ottoman Empire appeared not only from the moment of the proclamation of a new state. It existed both in the times of the Seljuks and in the era when the bulk of the Turkic peoples led a nomadic lifestyle. All the girls of the harem, who were considered concubines of the Sultan, read the same prayer every day: "Open the doors to me, my Sultan." Not a literal translation, of course. Most often, in the end, being the mistress of a harem, say, from the end of the 15th century, the beginning of the 16th, it was Valide Sultan who chose concubines for her son Sultan. Every girl dreamed of getting into the master's bed, because for her it was a great chance to give birth to Shahzad, thereby obtaining the best living conditions, a separate room, her servants, another menu, and so on. In general, the Sultan practically did not see his harem. There was a rule that when the Padishah's shoes hit the floor with their heels, all the girls had to run to their rooms. To catch the Sultan's eye was a serious violation of discipline, and for this the concubine would certainly be punished. After the concubine for habit was chosen, she visited the hammam, applied all kinds of perfumes, did makeup and wore the best outfits and jewelry. The chief eunuch escorted the girl to the master's chambers. Kissing the skirt of the Padishah, by the way, was invented by Sultan Suleiman. This applied to everyone. What is interesting is that in fact the Sultan and the concubine were never alone in the chambers. But, apparently, the eunuchs, who were obliged to be in the Sultan's room at that time, were not considered living people, but still the same property. Their task was to provide continuous light from candles during intimate meetings of the Padishah. Habit in the Ottoman Empire was also called many other things, such as rare walks of concubines in the garden or park. Or in a hammam is a Turkish bath. There are separate cells rooms, also called habit. She was walking along the corridor, accompanied by the chief eunuch, who told her all the way about the rules of behavior with Shahzad. It is forbidden to raise your head, it is forbidden to look into his eyes. It is strictly forbidden to turn your back on Shahzada when you leave. And much more was told by the eunuch. But Gulbakhar was not up to him. There were only thoughts in my head about how to please Suleiman. What is he like? Probably looks like his mother Aisha. Tall and slender, manly and handsome. Gulbakhar's expectations collapsed in an instant when she saw Shahzad Suleiman. He wasn't a prince on a white horse. But still. In front of her stood a tall young man with a sparse beard and mustache. He had an overly large aquiline nose and blonde hair. But what particularly confused Gulbakhar was the rather long neck, which literally caught the eye. Obviously, Shahzada was bored with ordinary harem girls. Gulbakhar, after all, was of unearthly beauty, educated and well-mannered. Yes, she was a little spoiled, but it didn't spoil her at all. Suleiman turned out to be a wonderful lover, a kind and attentive person. Oh, Allah, he's also a jeweler. In the morning Gulbakhar put an exquisite expensive necklace around her neck. Khalfa quietly called Gulbakhar and took her to the upper floor of the harem. With the words, "Now you will live here," she opened the doors to a rather cozy room, which was called an apartment for Suleiman's favorites. To the great joy of the girl, she was given 2 slaves to serve her, and also sent a whole chest of gifts from Suleiman. Suleiman's mother gave a new name Gulbahar, Mahidevran. Thus began the rather carefree life of the Crimean princess in the Shahzad harem. Soon a young woman gives birth to a son Mustafa. It would seem that nothing can spoil the fate of Mahidevran, but at that time she did not know anything. It was in 1520 when news came of the unexpected death of Sultan Selim the Terrible, Suleiman's father. He was supposed to ascend the throne, and he's going to Istanbul. Aish Hafsa is preparing a harem for the new sultan as the legitimate Walid Sultan. But Mahidevran is not worried. She sees how Suleiman loves her, literally adores her son. He even stopped retiring with Filon and Gulfam, completely devoting himself to Mahidevran and their son. Mahidevran is already preparing to become the main wife of Sultan Suleiman and receives orders to arrive in Istanbul. It is a pity that there is no place for a harem in Topkapi, where Sultan Suleiman now rules. All his concubines and family live in the old palace. Mahidevran tries on a new dress for a meeting with the Padishah. Once a week or two he comes to visit his harem. Today is a special evening. Mahidevran is waiting for a gift from her beloved man. She saw him polishing a huge emerald on an expensive ring. He will probably give me this ring and finally tell me that I will become his official wife. After all, we've been together for so many years, and he still spends nights only with me. Naive Mahidevran. As if she could have known that Valide chooses a new concubine for her son every time and sends him to the Sultan's chambers. Mahidevran's hand slid over the lace fabric. She took a dress out of the closet. It was the emerald color worn by the ruling dynasty in which Suleiman likes so much. Mahidevran put on her dress and went to the mirror. The perfect collar accentuated her slender white neck. The girl smiled at the reflection of the queen, and she smiled back at her. Soon the chief eunuch will come for her to take her to the sultan's chambers. She will walk through the dark and narrow corridors of the old palace and finally meet the Padishah. The old palace, built by Sultan Fatih Mehmed, the conqueror of Constantinople, served as the residence of the Ottoman sultans and was the first palace built in the Ottoman Empire. Subsequently, Fatih began the construction of Topkapi, which will replace the administrative building of the empire, and the old palace will become the place where the harem of the sultan and his family will be located, where the sultans will also visit their concubines. It is safe to say that the tradition of evicting the entire harem of the former sultan to the old palace, as well as unnecessary or rebellious concubines, came to the Ottoman Empire precisely when the harem fully settled in Topkapi. The first such global migration occurred after the death of Sultan Selim II, son of Suleiman the Magnificent. This was done by Murad III, Shahzad Salima and Nurbanu. Interestingly, not only the harem of the former Padishah was evicted from Topkapi, but also all the eunuchs who served the old sultan. The new sultan completely changed this part of his life and appointed only those who came with him and whom he could trust to serve. All of them received new assignments and in any case left Topkapi, an element of which was also the Enderun Palace School. When his son Murad ascended the throne after Selim's death, the harem of the former ruler was sent into exile in the old palace. They made only one exception, Nurbanu Sultan, who turned from the first lady of the Padishah into Valide Sultan. The tradition of resettlement, which began with Murad, has been observed by all subsequent sultans for centuries. Murad's personal harem paid for it with his wives and concubines. When Murad passed away, Mehmed, who again ascended to the throne, easily got rid of all his father's women. Moreover, as we know, historians attribute to Murad the largest number of children in the history of the Ottomans, as many as 130 people. And at the time of his death, about 20 concubines were pregnant. Mehmed, as we know, killed 19 of his brothers, ordered all his father's concubines, wives and daughters to be put in carts and exiled to the old palace along with their possessions. Then there were only pregnant concubines, most likely for certain purposes. Some historians write that these women were drowned, others say that only newborn children died. During the Ottoman Empire, using the method of exiling former and unwanted wives to the old palace, a new tradition appeared, called the Valide Sultan procession. This was due to the fact that all the women who had nothing to do with the ruling sultan lived in the old palace. But, as we remember, starting with Sultan Ahmed I, Shahzad was no longer executed, but kept in a cage. Well, when such a prisoner ascended to the throne from prison for various reasons, his mother returned to Topkapi. This was one of the main things that the new Padishah did. The Walid Sultan procession is a majestic ceremony when a mother and her retinue return to her son in Topkapi to head the harem. Considering that many Shahzadas spent a long time in cafes, their mothers had to wait quite a long time to be touched by this ceremony. For example, Mahmud I, who came to power directly from cafes, made his mother wait for his return to Topkapi for 27 years, and Osman III's mother waited for this event for 51 years. All this time the women lived in the old palace. In their free time, which the former concubines had in bulk, women were engaged in embroidery and other crafts, as evidenced by the description of a large number of workshops. No, Mahidevran. Today you will not go to the Sultan's Havit. He is going to meet another concubine. The most terrible words that our heroine could hear. And one day they were uttered by the harem Khalfa. Mahidevran's legs gave way, and a veil covered her eyes. She felt that she was losing her balance and was about to collapse right on the floor. Tears rolled from her beautiful brown eyes. But who is the one who takes Suleiman? A terrible, painful feeling gripped Mahidevran. Her hands were weak, and her mind clung to one thing. It was an accidental infatuation of the Sultan. Weeks passed, but she never got to Suleiman's chambers. Rumors spread in the harem that the new mistress of the Lord overshadowed his mind and feelings. That she does not leave the Sultan's room for days on end, and he gave her the name harem, which brings joy. Mahidevran did not even want to think that the Padishah was lost to her. After all, she is the mother of his only heir, Mustafa. No, he can't leave her and her son. Tears poured from Mahidevran's beautiful eyes as she ran down the corridor to her doom. She decided to take revenge on her rival once and for all, and when she saw how she easily left the Sultan's chambers, Mahidevran attacked her and began to beat her with her hands, fists and scratch her face. If it wasn't for the harem warlords who arrived at this time, Mahidevran would have killed her. The eunuchs took the angry Mahidevran to her room, and harem was taken to the infirmary. Let her not survive. Let her die, Allah. These thoughts did not leave the unhappy young woman. What awaited her for such an audacious act, Mahidevran did not yet know. But the clouds were already gathering overhead, and a shocking punishment awaited her. You will never enter the Sultan's chambers again. You are forever separated from him. Now your task is to raise your son, and soon you will leave the palace. Mahidevran at some point surrendered to circumstances. She decided that if she could not return Suleiman's love, she would still be able to fight for the Sultan's throne. After all, she had a strong trump card on her hands. This is Shahzad Mustafa. Having done everything to make him a sultan, Mahidevran will not only save his son from the law of fatigue, but also become a Valide sultan. The life of Mahidevran and her son Mustafa in Manisa was measured, quiet and family. Shahzad had a good enough education to easily cope with the tasks of governing the province. Mahidevran was only required to continue raising her son, supporting and instructing him at the right moments. But the feeling of revenge did not leave Mahidevran. She also knew about the bloody law of fatigue. What if harem, who already had more than one son, attempts to make one of them a sultan? Mustafa will be executed. Mahidevran knew and understood all this. Therefore, she did everything so that Shahzad Mustafa aspired to take the throne. Her upbringing was distinguished not only by maternal care for her son, she pushed him in every possible way to take the throne. The Ottoman Empire experienced a truly glorious period of the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. According to the Turks, one of the main sins of Kanuni is the execution of the talented Shahzad, who would be the best sultan. Then Suleiman committed another great sin, killing his son Bayezid and 5 grandchildren. But what was Shahzad Mustafa accused of and why was he killed? Many history experts consider Mahidevran responsible for Mustafa's upbringing and everything that happened around him. His mother instilled in him from childhood that he would become a sultan, and established contacts with various important people who could support Mustafa. But all this led to infamous events. The Janissaries who claimed to be loyal to Mustafa, in fact, only sowed even more doubts about Suleiman. And the famous naval admiral Turgut Reis, who promised support to both Mahidevran and Mustafa, created a real threat to the Sultan at sea. Following the advice of his mother, Mustafa remained blind to the fact that in fact all his actions only increased Suleiman's suspicions. Probably, Mahidevran wanted what was best for her son, but she was not strong in politics, and therefore everything was done quite differently. Turkish historians have done a great job processing thousands of archival documents and artifacts. They made conclusions that the people hardly expected. According to famous history professors, Mustafa himself is guilty of being executed. Professor Ahmed Haluk Dursun, who was the director of the Topkapi Palace, wrote that an important point in deciding on the execution of Mustafa was his connection with Iran, which was proven. In addition, he stressed that Mustafa had become a favorite of the people and the Janissaries, which made Suleiman vulnerable to rivalry. Kanuni saw everything, understood everything, and when deciding on the execution of Mustafa, he was guided solely by the mind of the Padishah, and not by the feelings of his father. At that moment he was not a father, he was a sultan. When her son and grandson were executed by order of the Sultan, Mahidevran fell into such disfavor with the Padishah that she almost died of starvation. According to some sources, Mahidevran wrote letters to Suleiman from Bursa, asking him for mercy and financial assistance. But he remained deaf to her requests. It is believed that the debts were then repaid by Selim, the son of Harem, who ascended to the throne, and he also assigned her a lifetime monthly salary. However, more recently, one of the famous historians wrote that shortly before his death, Suleiman took pity on this poor woman, paying her debts. I think it was done after Harem's death. It is said that it was by her will that Mahidevran was deprived of everything. And then Selim, who had already ascended to the throne, allocated Mahidevran a monthly income. Whatever it really was, for Mahidevran herself, all this no longer mattered. She really wanted to complete the mausoleum for her son Mustafa. Eventually it became possible under Selim. For 15 long years, after Suleiman's death and before her death, Mahidevran lived with memories of how she was betrayed by her beloved man, who is now no longer alive. How this love led to the death of his only son. Mahidevran ended her life in Bursa, praying daily for Shahzad and her grandson. Fate treated this woman cruelly, extending her life far beyond the death of her enemies. She survived the death of Harem and Suleiman, the death of most of their children. She was buried in Bursa next to her son, having lived a long 82 years. My friends, thank you for watching. I create high-quality content for you. Don't miss new videos. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to receive a notification. Michael's with you.